Welcome to the next episode of Real Stories Leadership Series for the Canadian real estate industry. I'm your host, Micheline Bentley from Matrix360, and we're excited to collaborate with Informa Canada. We're delivering a platform for leaders to share their experiences, and the intent of our dialogue is to engage with business leaders as they share their insights and wisdom. Before we commence, a little tidbit about us, Matrix360. We're an advisory platform that bridges the human experience with business innovation. It is a great privilege and honor that we partner with and advocate for people in our industry. Today we are at the Canadian Apartment Investment Conference, CAIC, and we're honored to be joined by Jaime McKenna, welcome, Chief Investment Officer, Minto Apartment REIT. So thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you.
To kick off the conversation, we're wondering if you could describe a moment that you've experienced in your career that you felt made a really positive impact on you.
So I would say one of the most positive or outstanding moments in my career is I had this wonderful boss. She was a vice president at Bell. She had this great energy, and she used to use this term, "Will you take the hill with me?" And it really represented to me a boss that wanted there to be a two-way street, two-way dialogue with her team, and that, are you committed to me to overcome the challenge, which is the hill, but I'm committed to you and want you to be part of me overtaking this. It's not just me as the leader, but you as a team. And it's something that I've taken as part of my leadership journey and imparted on my team is I want a team that we're committed to each other when we're overcoming challenges.
That it's not just about the journey, but it's about what happens along the way, that you're there for each other and supporting.
Exactly.
Can you think of a time when you had a sort of memorable, impactful lesson that you've kind of learned throughout this journey, perhaps somewhere on the hill?
Absolutely. I remember I was in my late 20s and I had a coach. We had assigned coaches to the directors in the company. And I did a personality assessment and I scored really low on vulnerability. And at first I thought, that's excellent. It means I'm tough. But then what I realized is that I wasn't showing any kind of vulnerability to my team, which meant I wasn't open to my team. And in the last over 10 years since I did that, it's been something I've focused on and want my team to be able to feel open with me, both professionally and personally, and it's changed my approach to how I manage my team. I do want them to see that things do impact me, whether you're restructuring and letting people go, exactly. And it's really gone a long way.
I find it interesting when you reflect on like how you've changed, what you would do differently if you could go back in time. And I want to pick up on a quote from you, actually, from your valedictorian speech.
Oh my.
The quote is, "Face your future endeavors with courage and continue to drive by challenging the status quo." If you could go back in time, I always find it interesting when you do have the opportunity to reflect to a time where you're thinking about mentorship. And I want to kind of bring up a quote from your valedictorian speech not too long ago that really caught my eye. "Face your future endeavors with courage and continue to change by challenging the status quo." And I wonder if you could go back to your 20-year-old self. What are some critical pieces of advice, what you said back then, what you've experienced, and where you're at now that you would provide?
So I would say the exact same quote today that I did more than 10 years ago. It was actually a long time ago, it feels like. But what I would tell my 20-year-old self would be nicer, be calmer, have more composure. And I think, maybe it's a woman in business, working in a male-dominated environment. You're constantly trying to be tough and heard at the table. And what I've learned is it doesn't have to be aggressive. It can be assertive, but you can still do it with humor and kindness and get your point across and not be so focused on being the tough guy around the table.
And so taking the courage out of your quote to drive change by challenging the status quo, in the sense the status quo being that we're in a male-dominated industry, but you also have an opportunity to bring the strengths as a woman to the table.
Well, and I think when I say challenge the status quo, I actually meant the business issues. Is that, my team would tell you, never come to Jaime and say, well, that's how it's always been done. because I hate hearing that.
Yeah.
Is that let's look at new ways to accomplish
Right.
things. But
That's
it's
the best way.
how you manage as a leader is what I think I would give the most advice to myself 10, 15 years ago.
With compassion. It's interesting. There's a theme there, the human element.
Absolutely.
What do you think your largest misconception about your career is?
It's a good question. I think, can I think about that one for a second?
Sure.
I got a misconception about my career. Let's think about that one. Well, okay. So I would say probably the largest misconception I had about my career is that I'll always be an accountant. And I think when you come up the ranks through finance, you never really see yourself leaving finance.
Right.
And over the years, having had exposure to deals and different transactions, different people, I had leaders that encouraged me to push outside of my norm, what I knew, what my comfort zone was. I had the misconception that I would always just be the finance person around the table. And now I'm actually not the finance person around the table, and it's opened so many doors I didn't expect.
That's fascinating. And so you kind of challenged the status quo yourself with that very switch in your career.
And with the encouragement of the people around me.
So reflecting on your career again, are there any factors that you've noticed that affect employees in the workplace as you see it today?
I would say uncertainty.
Uncertainty.
Absolutely. And whether it's job security or lack of definition of what's coming next. Minto's gone through a lot of change since I've been there.
Yeah.
And I always say to my team, the only thing that won't change is change itself.
Yeah.
So
That's the one thing that's constant.
absolutely. And I think finding the people around you that you can honestly say, I don't know what the next 6 months holds, but we're here together as a team and we're going to work through it, means a lot. But there's a lot of people that can't stomach it, and people that say they can stomach it and can't stomach it. So I'd say that's one of the biggest things that I've been facing over the last 10 years at Minto.
And I suppose that's true a lot in the industry in general, because real estate, the one thing constant about it is change, right?
Absolutely.
This kind of leads to the next question. If there was someone that you've looked to professionally for guidance, you've mentioned that a few times throughout leadership advice, as you've kind of progressed throughout your career, who would that person be?
I would say I've had a lot of mentors. I've been in different industries. I've been in different roles. I have peers that I have the utmost respect for and have developed a great friendship with, that you can have really honest conversations, and they call you on how you approach a situation, give you advice, and vice versa. So that relationship means a lot to me. Even my boss and my boss's boss, Michael Waters, they've been the ones that have encouraged me to go beyond what I thought I was capable of. And, you know, it goes back to my point around finance, is that they said to me, I remember, you're great at finance, but I think you have more.
Yeah.
And I think that's something women, young people need, that little push to give themselves the confidence and do something outside the comfort zone.
Seeing beyond the obvious.
Exactly.
And what would you say is the best piece of advice that you've received from maybe one or two or several of them? Maybe there was a common theme there.
Be myself. And, you know, it sounds maybe a little bit corny, but what I mean by that is we all have our all nuances and certain personal attributes. But the advice I got was be yourself. Because if you're not yourself, you're not authentic.
Yeah.
So you might have a trait that doesn't fly great in the room, but overall, if you're being yourself, you're going to deliver the most authentic message.
Yeah.
If you're not yourself, you're working with the wrong people.
And it's hard to be vulnerable without knowing who you are.
Exactly.
So it in of itself is a work in progress.
Exactly.
Here's something interesting I'd like to share with you. According to the latest stats for Canada's census report, 82% of the population live in large and medium-sized centers and cities across the country, one of the highest concentrations among the G7 nations. Also, according to 2016, Matrix Canadian Real Estate Diversity Workplace Survey polled that in Ontario, over 52% of the population in urban centers are female, while less than 34% of women are in leadership positions. In Ontario, between 35 to 54% of the working population in urban centers identify as visible minorities. So that would be visible race, ethnic groups, etc. Yet less than 25% of them are in leadership positions. So considering this information, could you share with us what you think the industry are doing to acknowledge some of these factors within the Canadian workforce?
For sure. I mean, it's no surprise that the Canadian real estate industry is not an overly diverse industry, whether it's gender, religious, sexual orientation. Yeah. It's just not something that is prevalent yet. But I can tell you in the 10 years I've worked in the industry, the conversation is being had, and it's being had more often and more prevalent than I've ever seen before.
And why would you say that?
I think there's just been a recognition in the last 5 or 6 years that it's not about having 50% women around or the right ethnicity. It's the diversity of opinions.
Yeah.
You need to represent who your customers are in the boardroom.
Right.
And I think the industry maybe didn't need to do that in the past, and they're starting to realize that as the industry changes, technology changes, needs change, they need to make sure they have that diversity of opinion around the table.
Especially with the aging demographics, that you've got a shift and a gap actually in the industry, in which case you really have to kind of think about those factors.
Absolutely.
As a leader, how have you adapted to the changing demographics in our communities to foster an inclusive workplace? So that could be anything to do with, hiring, promoting, succession planning. It could even be governance of procedures and policies, or perhaps some learning and development aspects like mentorship or professional development.
So I would say the first, most recently one that we did is we actually have a diversity policy when we launched our REIT in July. We wanted to demonstrate that that's an important attribute to our board representation, our executive management representation, and covering all aspects of diversity, not just gender. And I think that's important. I think we get caught in the male-female conversation,
we do.
and we don't pay enough attention to cultural backgrounds, religious backgrounds, and so on.
Yeah.
So that would be the most recent thing we do. But we definitely are having the conversation around our board tables, in addition to the policies that we've put in place.
Do you see a reflection of what you're trying to change at the board level?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, absolutely. So our CFO right now is a woman. Myself as the CIO is a woman as well. So we're definitely seeing the gender diversity, and it's slow going. Once you make the commitment to do it, it slowly comes in through the ranks and comes in through management and executives. We have a significantly diverse executive management team across Minto, which I think is a reflection to the openness we've had over the number of years to make that a priority.
So to reiterate, the Real Stories Leadership Series is positioned to showcase the insight and the wisdom of real estate leaders. That being said, what footprint would you like to leave as a legacy in the business community?
So I am going to go the gender route.
Okay.
What I would like to see is that women speak up more around the table and encourage the next generation. I think when you sit around the table, you are the only woman. You may feel intimidated, you may feel different, you may feel like your voice doesn't want to be heard. But I think if we make a conscious effort, the more we speak up, the more confidence we give the next generation. And then we get to see that diversity around the boardroom table. And to me, it's a bottom line issue, is that the diversity around the table drives profit because it represents the people that are actually paying our paychecks every single week.
Right. So to conclude our conversation today, what is one word you would use to capture the essence of who you see yourself as a leader?
Empathetic. I don't know if I like that.
You can change it.
Yeah, let me think. One word as a leader. I don't want to use, I want a word below bold. Like, maybe courage. That's what I'll do.
Courage.
So I'll say courage. Yeah.
So courageous leader.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jamie. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate the level of engagement in our conversation. And on behalf of Matrix360 and Informa Canada, we appreciate you taking the time to share your perspective and some of your experiences with us today. If you'd like to learn more about Matrix360 or Informa Canada, please check us out on our website. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.